Democrats finished their party in Charlotte and we're headed for the election stretch run. Welcome to a special edition of DC Bureau, the Wall Street Journal's online political show from Charlotte. I'm Jerry Seib, and to walk down that road to November 6th, I'm joined by Joel Benenson, President Obama's campaign pollster. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jerry. Happy to be here.
60 days, more or less, but who's counting?
Yeah.
It looks from where I sit, where most people sit, as if it's a close election today and is likely to remain a close election. Are we right about that?
Yeah, and our assumption all the way in was that this was going to be a close election. You know, President Obama was only the fourth Democrat in history to get 53% of the vote in 2008. And if you look at our last six elections and you look at all of them in that perspective, you know, we've had only two presidents who got that high. President Bush, first President Bush, and then President Obama. And every other one of them has been really close, and the only one who got to 50% was George W. Bush in 2004 in his re-election. We always anticipated it to be close. We expect you'll see it remain close all the way through. We're expecting to fight for every vote till the end.
So who are those undecided voters right now, and what do they look like to you?
Well, I'll give you some. I don't want to give my friend Neil Newhouse any insight into who we think the undecided voters are.
That would be the Romney pollster, Neil Newhouse.
Side, right? Yeah. But look, first of all, what we have here, because we're later in the campaign than we typically are,
right.
So we've got a smaller slice of undecided or soft voters even. We're now looking at a universe that's probably somewhere in the range of 10% of the electorate, so it's a pretty small slice.
And those are undecided or soft
undecided
enough? They could go
or
either
soft,
way.
that's
okay.
right. You know, and not by soft, not either way. They might be leaning towards,
right.
you know, Obama, but not fully convinced. Same with Governor Romney. You know, I think in the 21st century, which is a term we can start talking about now that we're going to our fourth presidential election in the 2000s, you know, I think what you have is a couple of patterns that are overlapping. Some are distinct. I mean, first of all, women have become very important generally, but you know, suburban women have become very important as a critical voting bloc when you get to undecided or swing voters. Young voters, there's always an issue about will they turn out or not. We believe they are. We've done a lot of work on that front. You know, and I think that, you know, you've got working people, working men and women, people who call themselves working class and middle class, who, you know, are really trying to reclaim that security, that the devastation that occurred in the economic crisis and leading up to it, the years leading up to it in the you know 2004, 5, 6 years, who are really focused on their economic futures. So there's some overlap in those groups. You know, they're not all mutually exclusive, and that's what you got to find. You got to find the real discrete ways you can find those voters and persuade them.
You know, you could make an argument that if you are not an Obama voter yet, you know enough about the president. If you haven't decided you're going to be with him yet, you've really already decided that you're not going to be with him. That's what a Republican would say. Is there some truth to that?
I'm sure the Republicans like to spin that, but no, there is not truth to that. If you know, they've said that they've said a lot of things all the way along to make their case, and that's okay. That's part of their jobs. But I think that look, President Obama's numbers have been in the horse race questions in most polls pretty much in the high 40s. Right. Governor Romney has been down a couple of points, anywhere from 1 to 4, depending on which of those polls you want to look at. You know, there isn't going to be a shutout pitched among these soft voters or undecided voters. That's not the case. A lot of those folks are, many of them are more favorable to the president than they are to Governor Romney.
And they're just not there yet? They're just not quite there yet?
They may be soft, right? Yeah. You know, so we keep communicating. But they're very focused on who's going to be fighting for them, who's going to be in their corner for the next 4 years. That's a contrast that's emerged during these last 2 weeks at both conventions. You know, I think you saw it this week at our convention, a very clear depiction of what motivates President Obama from his life, from his work, his personal point of view about what we need to do as a country, that all, you know, shape the notion that he's going to be fighting for those folks every day in the Oval Office. Those people who are in the middle class, working to get there. He's got their backs. He's got their fight. He knows that that's not only good for them, but it's good for America, because we've got to build an economy that's meant to last.
Now, that was the message of this convention.
Yes.
But you also mentioned at the outset, Joel, that we're in a very unusual calendar. We're past Labor Day, and that's never happened before. Does that mean convention bounces are just not an issue this year?
I think it's a great question. I think they are not going to be as big for either side. We've already seen Governor Romney had a modulated bounce, 1 point at the most. by some accounts. Look, you know, we used to say Labor Day was the beginning of the campaign season. We're now in the fourth quarter of the campaign. Everybody's been engaged in this. The campaigns have, the press and media, and the electorate has, because there was a lively Republican primary. So at this point, you are seeing a more entrenched electorate. And if you look at the convention since 2000, you've seen the post-convention bounces getting a little smaller. So I think they'll be modulated now and probably continue to be as long as this is the campaign calendar that we're living with.
You know, if you're engaged in my business, you used to be engaged in my business, you're always grasping for adjectives to describe the mood of voters or the mood of the country. Give me a few adjectives that describe the mood of the country right now.
I think they are forward-thinking. I think they are future-oriented. I think they have a long-term view. I think they know that America's been through a really damaging period. This even predates the crisis that brought us to our knees. You know, by the way, 4 years ago today, Lehman Brothers hadn't even collapsed yet. We were losing 400,000 jobs a month. They know what was going on. And so I think they are looking for they want to get back, but they know, as the president says, we need to do more than recover from this. We need to build an economy that is built to last, that restores that security for middle class and people striving to get there. So those are the adjectives I would think. And I think that's something that, frankly, the Republicans have underestimated. They've been using the same top-down arguments that they've been using for decades.
We simply cannot afford to give the reins of government to someone who will double down on trickle down.
They used those attacks against President Clinton, who had to resist those attacks during his presidency when he did a balanced plan to get the deficit down, raised tax rates, invested in things like education, technology, and our economy, and health care through CHIPS and Family Leave Act, and had this great period of job growth. So I think there's a difference between a very forward-looking approach and one that'll take us back to the same policies that wrecked the economy in the first place.
When you get down to sort of raw politics, you're talking about states, and you're probably talking about 8, 9 states that really will matter, the real swing states. Let me ask you to walk through 3 of them that both campaigns are paying a lot of attention to: Florida, Ohio, and Virginia. Just give me a sense of where you think things are in those 3 right now.
Sure. Look, we've had a consistent edge in Ohio, heartland of America, a place where President Obama's very tough decision to rescue the auto industry when it wasn't popular in the polls. By the way, it polled at about 30% support at the time he did it. He wasn't thinking about the polls. He never does. He did it because it was right for those workers. 1 out of 8 jobs in Ohio are related to the auto industry. So, you know, we're in a pretty solid lead right now there, but we're going to play very hard there until the end. Virginia was very competitive last time. One of the 2 states that people said, oh, you guys don't have a chance, you're not serious about this, and then we went ahead and won it just to, you know, not just to prove people were wrong, but because it's a state that is, you know, emblematic of a lot of what's great about America. They reflect some changes about where the country's going there in terms of that population, the jobs they're creating, people who are moving there and living there. Florida has been neck and neck all the way through, and we expect it to stay that way. And this will be a very fierce battle. Very hard to see Governor Romney finding any path to 270 if he doesn't win Florida. But he's got to do a lot more than win Florida to get to 270. But those 3 states, we're going to be fighting very hard. We think, you know, Florida, like I say, he's been up a point or 2. We've been up a point or 2. That'll be battled out like all of these states. Well, you mentioned the 9. You only mentioned 3. Well, every one of those states will likely be battled out. A couple may drop off for their side, but on our side, every one of those will be battled out until the end of the campaign.
And are voters in those states going to be numb to television ads by the end, and will it be a different dynamic, a ground game dynamic by the end?
Look, I think the ground game dynamic is going to be important, irrespective of whether they tune out the ads or not.
When Mitt Romney and Bain closed the plant, I lost my health care.
Everything I do is going to be focused on getting this economy going.
But I believe that's something we're going to have to look back on. You know, I've said for the last few weeks...
We've never really been in this kind of saturation environment
absolutely
before,
right, Jerry. I've said in the last few weeks that we are going to be looking back at this election and seeing an enormous amount of money spent to influence such a small slice of the electorate. The cost per persuadable vote will have gone through the roof. I don't think any of us know at what point the consumer of these, the voters, hits a tipping point and tunes out that ad. I think it's harder to penetrate. They've got a lot more media coming at them. They're relating to media differently. 15 years ago, they were just beginning to use the remote control to take control. Now they're controlling what they want to do online, controlling through social networks. So they have a lot more control of the process, and I think we won't know fully for a few years how that will impact our politics going forward.
Last question. Is there a likability gap in your favor and an enthusiasm gap in the Republicans' favor?
Well, I think the answer is definitely yes to the likability gap, but I don't think it's likability. I think you do us a disservice when you say that, people like President Obama more than they say they like Governor Romney, but that's not about who do you want to have a beer with. The other dimensions that you ask where President Obama has a meaningful advantage, and this relates to their economic well-being, is who understands the struggles of people like me. President Obama has a double-digit advantage over Governor Romney. Who will fight harder for the middle class going forward? President Obama has a significant advantage. Look at your own polls, they're really quite large. Those things aren't just about do you like President Obama, those go back to the fundamental question I said, who do you think is going to be fighting for you? Those are economic qualities, they're not likability. On the enthusiasm gap side, I think that's been overplayed. I think, there was a point where Republicans were more enthusiastic, but there was a point where they were campaigning and we weren't. They were in a primary season. When you look at it now, you go into the conventions the week before, the Republican convention, 30% of Republicans said they wish they had a different candidate. And in that same poll, I think it was a CNN poll, 17% said that among Democrats. So a 2-to-1 ratio there saying, hey, we're not that ecstatic about our candidate. Look, I think both sides are going to work hard to turn their voters out and fight over the persuadables. I think there's going to be plenty of enthusiasm over the next 8 weeks.
And plenty of
8 weeks yet or 7?
Who's counting? Yeah, plenty of intensity. So it'll be a fun game to watch. Joel, thanks for joining us. Hope you can do it again before we get to November 6th.